Hi, and everyone. Welcome to the Texas Virtual School Network Online Learning Conference. We're glad you could join us for today's session, Put Students in the Driver's Seat of Their Learning Experience, presented by Summer Alcater. This session will run until 2:45 Central Time approximately. I'm your host, Barbara Mears. Our facilitator is Taryn Washington. Our captionist is Elaine Plybon. To view the captions, select the closed captions button on your menu bar, and sign language interpretation is provided by Hired Hands. Please notice the participant toolbar. When you select the participant toolbar at the bottom of your screen, you'll find buttons to raise your hand and use emoticons. Polls may appear on the screen at different times during the presentation, and you can participate in the poll by selecting the number of your choice. The chat window is where you can ask the questions during the participation, and you can find that, and I think most of you have already found it, by clicking on the chat bubble, and then it's a mobile window, so you can move it anywhere you want on your screen. Please note that co-hosts will be able to view all chat comments and can respond to you. Finally, the audio button in the lower left-hand section of your screen can be used if you have a microphone, and there is an opportunity presented to use it during the presentation. It will be white and green when your microphone is live. And now I'm going to hand it over to our speaker, Summer Alcater.
All right, everyone should see that Put Students in the Driver's Seat of Their Learning Experience on their screen. So that's going to be the focus of today, is how to build blended learning courses and online learning courses in a way that makes students the primary responsibility of their learning experience, with the teachers as guides and facilitators. So before we begin, let me give you a little bit of background about myself, and then we'll get a little bit more background about everyone who's in the room today. So as I said, my name is Summer Alcater, and I work for the University of Texas at Austin High School. And we are a completely online high school who serve the needs of students here in Texas and all over the world, especially students who are looking for some kind of flexibility in their schedule. So we're a completely online high school, and we're also an asynchronous high school. So there's not a certain time that students have to log in. So we have a lot of students who maybe have medical who are traveling for some kind of sport or job, such as acting or dance, something like that, or students who may be accelerating to try to graduate early for some reason, or they want to supplement what they're already doing in their brick and mortar school. We serve students all over the state, and the website, highschool.utexas.edu, I'll direct you to that website during the presentation so that you can see what our courses look like from the inside, to give you some ideas. And then if you're a Twitter follower, UT High School's Twitter handle for our partner districts is UT_UTHS, and then my personal Twitter handle is @Sunny1492. Before we begin the presentation, you've already introduced your name and where you're from. Could you also tell me what your role is in the district, if you haven't shared that information already? And could you tell me in the chat box, if you use an LMS, what LMS are you using currently, just so we can get to know each person in the room? And while you're doing that, I'm going to pull the chat box out so I can see it. Great. So we've got a number of districts who use Canvas. That happens to be what the University of Texas uses as well. I will tell you that what we talk about today can be adapted to any learning management system. Edgenuity, Google, Buzz, great. Schoology, that's another great one. And Moodle, great. Texas It's Learning, very nice. So as you can see, there are a number of choices for learning management systems for schools. And I know as a teacher, when I started off using, we happened to use Edmodo at that time, it was for sheer practicality on my part, the thought of not having to take 150 papers home every night to grade sounded great to me, that I could do it in this online format. But I really didn't know how to build a course online. It was just a place to store materials. And I think that's where most of us have started, and that's a great place to start. And so we want to do now is go from using a learning management system as a storage place or a place to communicate with students to something that can guide and direct their learning and help them to learn, whether they're in the classroom or outside of the classroom, whether they're online, whether we're in a blended or a face-to-face environment. To get us started with the conversation, sometimes we know where we want to get to, but we don't actually know how to get there or what the steps are to get there. So let me show you a short video that illustrates that point.
And this one I've titled Tree.
Can you tell me what f-stop you had the aperture set to?
That was pretty big.
Exquisite. And the shutter speed?
Yeah, that was really quick. Like click.
How did you compensate for the diminished light?
Very well.
The Lumix G2 with intelligent auto. Great photos.
So often we have a destination and we have some tools to get us there, but we don't quite know how to put those into practice, or we can't explain to someone what our process is. So that's just kind of a fun introduction. Anytime we're starting on a new journey, and we're going to use a metaphor of a car or a road trip today to talk about writing a course. First of all, we have to think about what is our destination and how do we want to get there. And in terms of instructional technology, we think of that as a needs assessment. What do our students need? The first thing is, what kind of tools do we have available? We can think about things like if our students are adults, kids, what age. Are our students in an online environment, a blended learning environment, a face-to-face environment? But we have to think through all of the different needs of our students in order to get them on the journey in the best way. So as we talked about, who are your learners? Okay, are we talking about elementary school learners, junior high, high school, adults? Are we talking about a class that's totally in an LMS? Do we have some face-to-face elements? Is it a MOOC? Are there timelines for your course? You'll set up a course differently if it's a 6-hour professional development, whether that's a virtual professional development, or if it's a semester course, or if there's no time limit, if students can just access the course when they need that information. We have to think about what skills a learner needs. So by the time they finish this course, what are the objectives or the performance things that a student needs to do? And then how do we measure success? How do we know that the students are performing in a way that will help them to be successful in whatever that skill is? Okay, so what are our assessment pieces? And those are the things that we start before we ever build a virtual course. And there's a lot of overlap, of course, in building a virtual course or a face-to-face course, but there are some considerations that we need to take into account when we're talking about building within an LMS. There are a number of instructional models available. One that we use here at UT High School is the 5E inquiry-based model, and we'll look at that model in just a little bit. Because it's inquiry-based design or thinking about learning with the end in mind, there's a lot of different. But 3 instructional models that you can do research on are the Addy model, the Morrison, Ross, and Kemp model, and the Dick and Carey model. And I'm not going to take the time today to go through all of the steps of each of those models. But the basic pieces are they have a needs assessment at the starting point or an analysis of what is needed. There's a design concept, so you're thinking about what are your objectives, what are the assessment pieces, and the instructional strategies. Then you have a time to actually develop the course and hopefully put it into some kind of pilot to see what works and what needs to be changed. Once you've piloted and developed, then you implement it on a larger scale. And then you evaluate it at the end of the implementation. And hopefully that's an ongoing process. We're always implementing and evaluating. Some of the differences are Morrison, Ross, and Kemp model. They look at it more of a circular model where you can do some of the steps at the same time. Where in the Dick and Carey and the Addy model, they're looking at it more linearly where you're going to do each step in order. So you can take the best of what works for me from each model. When I was in graduate school for instructional technology a couple of years ago, we focused on the Dick and Carey model. And what I liked about that model was the emphasis on performance objectives. So not just what the students need to know, not the information just rolling around in their head, but what do they need to do? What are the skills that they need to learn? And then how do I measure whether or not they were successful? Those elements are in each one of these models. But there's a big emphasis on that in the Dick and Carey model. So I encourage you after this presentation, do a Google search on either one, on all three of these, and kind of have them with you as you go and design a course. You can use these as your roadmap as you're building, a roadmap for students. The next consideration is your learning platform, and it looks like almost everyone in the room is using some kind of LMS. There are some school districts that allow students, or teachers rather, to use, whichever LMS that they want to. They might be a Google Classroom school, another teacher might use Edmodo. Other districts have said everyone needs to use one learning management system. In our case, that would be Canvas. The pros to using one learning management system across a school or district would be consistency for a user. Students would have the same expectation and the same set of tools as they move from one class to another. On the other hand, there are different design functions in each one of the programs. So there might be something in Canvas that's not in Edmodo or vice versa. You also have to think about user friendliness for students. So does your LMS need every bell and whistle, or do you need more of a scaled down model that's simple for both teachers and students to use? And I'm seeing a comment that says username and passwords is a common student complaint. That's absolutely true, and we'll talk about that in just a little bit. One of the things with whether it's a learning management system or any online tool is lowering the barriers to entry barriers, basically. Oftentimes when I'm working with school districts who are using our digital curriculum or logging into a course, once they get into the course and are using it, everything runs pretty smoothly, but sometimes that username and login becomes a barrier to entry into the course. And not just here at UT, previous school that I've worked for, anytime usernames and passwords that aren't easily accessible, especially for teachers or students who are reluctant users, or this is a new experience for them. So finding ways to make that barrier as low as possible. But think about functions that help learners to connect to educators and classmates. And again, that may look different depending on how your school is set up. Some schools are very open with things like chat spaces, things like social media. Other school districts have a more closed policy about those things. if you're in a classroom space that is asynchronous where everyone can't communicate at the same time, what are the challenges and the benefits of each one of those things. But look for the also assessment features. One of the things that we love about Canvas is that I can build all of my quizzes, for example, directly in Canvas. I've built a number of internal courses in iTunes U, for example, which is a great platform as a storage space, but you have to go out to third parties for things like assessments and activities, and so you do have issues with username and password. And yes, single sign-on is a great way for students to deal with username and passwords for sure, especially in a learning management. So I'd like to move back to our chat box and hear from you. How do you already encourage learner-focused instructional design on your campus? So thinking about the LMS that you use, thinking about what your teachers are already doing on your campus, how do you encourage learner-focused design or courses on your campus? And you can type that in the chat box. Great. So we encourage students can recommend alternative assignments, including students in creating and moderating discussions. Absolutely. Mastery pathways, and we'll talk about mastery-based learning in just a minute. Relevant and authentic scenarios. So I know we all, as teachers and educators, how does this apply to me? How am I going to use this in the real world? So showing how learning makes sense through project-based learning, absolutely. Voice and choice. So how do you want to submit? Do you want to do video or audio? Some kind of multimedia presentation. Absolutely. Understanding by design, backwards design. Using student-created videos and quizzes, that's great. And then being able to use small groups. So I know that my experience with both Edmodo and Canvas, you have your class, but then you can also break students into smaller groups. Absolutely. Role-playing, any kind of student-created PowerPoint, any kind of student-created assets that you can use in the classroom. Giving students voice and choice in their assignments. And this is a new thing, or a newer thing, it's been around for a while, but giving teachers the opportunity for audio and video feedback instead of just written feedback, which sometimes can be as practical as being a time saver to be able to speak what you're thinking, but it also gives students an authentic experience, especially if you're in an online course, then they don't have your face every day to connect with or build relationships. But if you have that audio or video, then you can start, being more of an authentic person to the person on the other side of the screen. These are great suggestions. Wiki and blog assignments, shared writing opportunities. Yeah, anytime. So I'm a Spanish teacher. So I'm talking about the speaking portion of the exam, giving students opportunity for authentic production of language is so important. And also instructional accommodation. So being able to differentiate your course is so important. Being able to give options, whether it's acceleration, whether it's more time and more materials, helping students with special needs, absolutely. Thank you guys so much. All right. So we want to think about the teacher, if we're using our road trip metaphor, as more of the GPS and the student as the driver. So strong instructional design allows an instructor to facilitate and to guide while allowing students to take responsibility for their learning. So at UT High School, our students can be here in Texas, and a good majority of them are, but we also have students who live in China and across the world. So we have 14-hour time differences between here and China, for example. So I have to build a course in a way that if the student doesn't have the teacher right in front of them, they're going to understand the material on the page. Now, that doesn't mean that they don't have any communication with the teacher. We have messaging systems and ways for them to get a hold of a teacher and to get more help through either live video tutoring, or we have a messaging center. But it may be, 6 or 7 hours before they're able to hear from their teacher because of time difference. So I have to think, how do I guide the students, but yet they're taking responsibility for the work? We do a lot of questions when we're in the course, and we have them create an interactive notebook so that they're kind of making a journal of everything that they're learning, which also helps them, of course, to pass the final exam, but to put that learning into practice as they move forward into the practical things of life. And what I love about online design and just great pedagogy is sometimes a student may discover something new because they've made a wrong turn, and I put that in quotation marks. We have to give students the opportunity, and a lot of you are doing this because of voice and choice, to take a risk with an assignment, to try something new, to demonstrate their mastery in a new way. And it may not turn out exactly how they anticipated, but it may create an even more valuable learning experience. So we want to set up our online courses or our blended learning courses in a way that we allow for voice and choice. We give them options and enough time to try something new as we're guiding them through the process, but giving some time and some permission for experimentation to see what else a student might learn that might be deeper. So they might hit a detour or a wrong turn, but it may be a wrong turn that helps them learn something more valuable. Or it may just be that we need to be the GPS and point them back in the right direction and get them back on track to where they need to go. Another thing that we want to do is build curiosity by asking questions and engaging students in critical thinking. So gone are the days where a teacher is the holder of the knowledge or the textbook is the holder of the knowledge. And certainly teacher experts and, textbooks or other places where you can get information is as relevant today as it was 1,000 years ago. But now we have Google. So if I need to know a fact, I can go look it up. But what I may not know how to do as a student is know how do I know that that fact is real? So as a teacher, rather than just giving my students the facts, it's more of my responsibility now to teach students critical thinking and how to evaluate when they go online to Google. How do I know if this is true or not true? What keys can I look for that will tell me if this is a reliable source or not a reliable source? Once I have that reliable date from my history class, what does that mean? Why do we study history in the first place? Students ask. So how do I connect that date that we've looked up in Google and we know is true to something happening today? And how can we find the patterns in history so that we can learn from those patterns and move forward? Or what does this graph mean in math that my teacher is making me learn, and how does that apply to something in my real life? So moving beyond the facts, moving beyond the holder of information to helping students think for themselves and guiding them through that process. So let me take a minute and show you our design here at UT High School. And if you go to highschool.utexas.edu, and right at the very top, it says course demo, so you're welcome to look at that at any time. The course demo doesn't need any login page, and there's a lesson from a number of our courses, so you can just see what those look like. Celeste, I'm sorry, it's high school. There you go. Awesome. Thank you so much. So here we're at, and then we just go over here to course demo, and you can get into that at any time. And this is our high school instance of Canvas. And so we create modules based on the 5E model. And I'm going to use this Algebra 1 as an example. So you'll see this is what we have a unit, and just in the particular way that we build our courses here at UT High School, most semester courses have anywhere from 9 to 12 units in them.
Congratulations to Chris S. Well done. Picks up the Apple Watch from Clark Scarf Haircut. That point started up.
So if I go in here, you can see we have the engage, explain, elaborate, explore, evaluate. And so we are building all of our courses like this so that a student has a consistent experience, since we don't get to see them very face-to-face very often. They know when they go into engage, this is kind of our hook, or the questions we might be asking. In this case, we're going to talk about buying burgers and sodas. Because what does burgers and sodas have to do with graphing in algebra? And honestly, algebra is not my forte. Math is not my favorite subject, but I love that this makes it real for me, because even though math isn't my love, I can relate to, burgers and sodas. So we put up a problem here for students to try to solve and think about how this relates back to something that might be interesting to them. And then we're going to give them some documentation that they can download on their computer. They can print it out however they want to get to it. And then there's a number of videos of direct teaching happening. So now we're in the explain portion. So a student in our course knows that if they see explain, there's going to be some direct teaching. And then once I've watched those videos, and again, what I love about video is that a student can pause it, back up, move it forward. And even if you're in a face-to-face classroom or a blended learning environment, you can use these videos in a flipped learning type environment. So they're going home and previewing this information. It's a lot easier to convince a kiddo or an adult to go home and watch a video than it is maybe to do, 20 or 30 math problems. So they've watched those videos, they've gotten an idea, and now we're going to move into some guided practice, okay? So they've got another file that they can download in this case. It's got an interactive activity with some puzzle pieces that they can do, and then there's a way for them to check their answers. So hopefully it's guiding them through the process. And then we have some more exploration for them to do and some more practice for them to do. So we're going to move a little deeper. They've done some guided practice, and now we're going to move deeper. Absolutely. Flipped classroom is effective because you're talking about a shorter period of time. And a student feels like they can be successful in watching a video, but they might need more assistance, with doing some of their homework. And then the way our courses are built is we have a number of quizzes that are what we call self-assessment. So a student's going to take a quiz, but there's no grade attached to this quiz, and they can take it as many times to see, have I learned this concept? Have I not learned this concept? What do I need to work on? And then there's not one in this particular module, but oftentimes there will be a graded assignment at the end. So once they've practiced, they know they've gotten it, the concept down, then they can move into a more guided practice environment and a graded assignment environment. So One of the ways that we're incorporating voice and choice into our courses, and it's a little bit trickier in these, but one thing that our English department has done when they've redesigned their courses is they have students do a number of different types of writing pieces. And then within those writing pieces, they can decide which one that they choose that is their favorite to then turn into their teacher as a graded assignment. So they're getting to, do all of the different types of writing practice, but then they have a voice in which one they're actually turning into for a grade, because they may like this type of poetry better than the other type of poetry, or this type of writing over another type of writing. In our environmental science course, we have an upcycling project for students to do, and so they're given a rubric, and then within that rubric, what they have to do is take something that is old and turn it into something new. And the sky's the limit on what they can actually build, but there's some documentation to their process, analyzing why it's important for the environment and putting all of that work into practice. So our courses have some standardization because of the nature of what we do for students, but we are in the process of building in more voice and choice into our courses to help students. But that's just a little bit of an overview of how we build courses here at UT High School. I'm going to move back to the presentation, but you're, again, welcome to explore that at any time. So on the back end of courses, how do we do this? The first thing we do in designing the map, or how we lay these things out for our students, are what are our objectives, okay? In the state of Texas, those are typically the TEKS, give us the guidelines of what students need to know and do. And then how do we measure those objectives? So we have a lot of quiz type options, but we also have a lot of more project or open learning options. As much voice and choice as you feel like you can give students, I think they take ownership of a project even more. The number 3 and 4 are really important, especially in an online environment. Building on prior knowledge. So what do students already know? And then chunking lessons into manageable pieces. Building on prior knowledge has two things. Does the student need to repeat something that they can already master? And we'll get into mastery-based learning in a minute. And also giving them the confidence to start with something that they know and then challenge them with something that they don't know. There's a theory called cognitive load theory. So we don't want to bog a student down with too much at once, or they get overwhelmed and they stop learning. But we also don't want them to do everything they've done before that they think is too easy, because they get bored and they stop. So there's a sweet spot in there where we give them enough of what they know, combine it with some new information, and it's kind of like stairs going up a little bit at a time. Combine that with chunking, because if I'm going back to my Canvas page, if a student has to scroll down for 5 pages, they're going to zone out and not really pay attention to what's on the screen, whether it's a video, whether it's a screen of text, etc. So we try to make it to where if a student has to scroll, it's very little. And then they click the next and back button, and each page has a different activity on it or a different piece of instruction on it. So we're keeping the students engaged. And those are things that may be a little bit different than in a face-to-face environment, although we do create transitions in a face-to-face environment, to keep students interested in learning. So think about your transition and how your LMS will allow you to build courses so that you don't have students scrolling for pages and pages. Also think about what kind of multimedia things you can build into courses, not for the sake of multimedia, because there's a limit to bells and whistles that need to be built to help students. But what types of multimedia are helpful to students in order to to learn and to show their learning as well. So yes, I love the comment that PBL creates voice and choice in final products. Absolutely. So it could be writing or an infographic and giving different environments. Okay, another consideration is how synchronous or asynchronous can your course be? And it could be a combination of both. So at UT High School, because of the time differences and because of the particular needs for our students, our courses are asynchronous. That means that even communication with teachers does not happen right away necessarily. The way our school system works is a student may ask a question, and a teacher will respond within 24 hours, oftentimes much faster than that. And we do have options for students to have face-to-face tutoring through Skype or Google, etc. Any way they can do video. Yes, it's great for summer as well. So like right now we have a kiddo studying in Spain because he wants to go to a specialized trumpet school, and he got accepted into this academy, but he had already started high school in Texas. So it was going to be difficult for him to transfer to the Spanish school system as a sophomore, junior in high school. So he has the option with asynchronous courses. He can do his course in Spain, 6-7 hour time difference. He can do the course, at midnight or on the weekend or whenever it makes sense for him, but then also focus on the special area of study. The same thing, we have kids, that may travel for a week for their parents, so they might not log in for that week, but then when they come back, they might spend, twice as much time. Now, that's not the typical way that school works for most students. However, you may have some things where you need them face-to-face with you in the classroom or on a live chat or all together at the same time. But there may be things where a chat board might be the best way to go, or students uploading audio or video as they think of new and creative ideas. And what I love about chat boards or threads or whatever is that students can type in an idea which may spark another student, and it may take them a couple of hours to think through what they want to say, but it gives them time to think. And I know when I was working with English language learners, giving them time to where, we've got that 45 minutes in the classroom, well, they may need more time to really build out what they want to say or how they want to say it. So giving them some extra time or not having to all do it at the same time makes sense. Absolutely. Processing time and reflection. The other thing to think about with synchronous and asynchronous learning is in that idea of mastery, a student may need that information right now, just in time learning, while another student, it may take them longer to get to that place. So if you've got some asynchronous times built into your schedule, so a student's probably in a typical school schedule is going to have to finish a course by the end of May. That's just a deadline that is set by the state that we don't have a lot of room to change. But one student may need 2 weeks to get through a project, and one student may need a week. So you can make, project deadlines asynchronous as long as they get through a certain point, for what you need for your school. Absolutely. And we have a number of students. Someone just posted a comment about a medical treatment. We have a number of students who have a difficulty in going to school because of some kind of medical issue or treatment. And so they're able to study when they're feeling well, or, at times where they're not in a doctor's appointment, or if they need to just have that computer while they're at the hospital, etc. Now, I do want to put a caveat on that. Student time management is probably the number one barrier that we find to online learning. And I will say as an adult, At the time I was doing my master's, I lived in East Texas, and we lived very far away from the nearest university. So I was fortunate enough to be able to do my master's degree in instructional technology online. And even as an adult, I had a full-time job. And so, managing my time was difficult. So you're working with 15-year-olds, you're working with 10-year-olds, and time management is a skill that they may not have fully developed. So as a teacher, part of that facilitator role is making sure that students are meeting milestones. In our particular instance, students have 150 days to complete their course, which is about 5 months. It's more than a typical school would give. But if we just said forever, we have kids that will buy, an extension once and then twice because not because the time wasn't sufficient, they didn't start when they needed to start. And so we're always working through the process of, in an online environment, what checkpoints can we put in to catch students earlier and make sure that they're not needing extra time because they just didn't start. So when building project-based learning, when building an online course, if you're doing any type of asynchronous learning, which I highly recommend, think through all of the milestones that students need to meet and how do you help them get there. And that may be where they're working partly online, but they're meeting with you face-to-face once a week for a checkpoint. It may be that they're having to turn in portions of the assignments, here's part 1, here's part 2, here's part 3, and then here's the full assignment. That's a great question. So the question is, are there scheduled checkpoints with instructions or guides for the students? So right now our students start at all different times. So not only is it asynchronous, but a student can start in August, they can start in October, they can start, in February, whenever they need to start a course. But our instructors will look and see, and if a student hasn't turned in any assignments in a certain amount of time, then we'll make contact with them. And the great thing about something like Canvas is that you can see how much time they've spent in Canvas. So if we see a student spend a good amount of time in Canvas, but they haven't turned in any assignments, we can say, hey, do you need some extra help? Or we can look in and go, hey, you signed up for this course like 6 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, but we don't see that you've done anything. What's going on? And then the way our units are built out is a typical time period would be a unit a week for students. If we build our courses to think about what could a student do in an hour a day or 5 hour a week classroom and build it out on that time model. And then they have some extra time built in because it's an online course. So if they're going out of town or, need to study at a different time. But that's the pacing guide for our students is typically a unit a week. And then instructors are checking, and we have counselor and vice principal that are checking to see, oh, this student, they're not making any progress. And so they'll give them a phone call and say, hey, what's going on? Do we need to sign you up for some tutoring? Do you need some extra help, etc. Yes, so pacing guides are elemental for both students and teachers, exactly. Yes, if you're in a synchronous course, most LMSs have calendars built into them. We have a syllabus with the different guides because since all of our students start on a rolling basis, there's not a way to put calendar dates in for them, but those are great ideas. Yeah, self-paced assessments like Quizlet or Kahoot is great as well. And yes, UTHS is 100% online. Okay, I think our discussion that we're having right now is kind of meeting this piece of how are online courses designed and managed on your campus. So if your campus is already building either blended learning or online courses, what are some strategies that you use? What kind of design strategies do you use? And then how do you manage those getting out to teachers? Are your facilitators the same person as your course designers, or are they different people? Monica, that's great to know about Buzz, that it can be asynchronous and build in the target dates. That's interesting. So I see some schools are saying that the facilitator and the teacher are the same person. Another district says that they have a different model where they might have a student in a class period working, but then they're working with a remote teacher. That's a great model. So if you're in a more rural school district where you have limited amount of teachers, but you do have facilitators that can at least help students to make sure they're logging in and deal with any technical issues, then you can use a remote teacher to open up your course catalog, or the types of courses that you can offer to students, but still, having somebody there to check on students. Yeah, so oftentimes when you're starting, and just like I started, a teacher may, it may just start as a place to host materials and give quizzes, and that's where a teacher starts, and that's fine. And then we build in these design things and think more about the back end of design as we go along. It's also, someone said, they use It's Learning. So it's also possible that you use a third party to do your design, and then because the back end of the design takes quite a bit of time. So our model at UT High School is we have 4 kind of department heads or learning specialists, one for each of the core areas. And then we bring in a number of teachers over the summer to help build and facilitate that course design. But there's no way that we could build and facilitate the number of courses without a large number of teachers and subject matter experts involved. Someone mentioned they use their LMS for professional development. So a lot of these things are the same. Whether you're talking about adult learners or you're talking about students, what may change is your professional development may be a shorter amount of time. It may be a more compact course, but we also use our LMS for professional development. We have an advanced academics coordinator, and so she built GT Professional Development in Canvas for teachers across the state. So if they couldn't get to like a region service center for a face-to-face GT course, then they can do it online. So really it depends on the resources of your campus or your district. Some districts, especially if there's a larger district with many resources, they may have a central office team who can be more of your design specialist, and then use teachers as the experts for subject matters. Sometimes the teacher is the expert, is the designer, and the facilitator. So ideally, if you have a subject expert and then either your facilitator or your designer may or may not be the same person, then that's ideal. But oftentimes, it is the teacher building everything. So we want to give them as much support as we can in that design process. So things that we can think about that are extended through online and blended learning, simply because you have more time and you have more creativity, are those extension and enhancement. So we've talked about project-based learning. You have a student who has picked up the basics very quickly, and the sky's the limit for what they can do. So having that menu of options for how they demonstrate learning, or having that enhancement piece built into the course if a student wants to dig deeper, is something that you can start building in once you got your basic course designed. We've talked throughout this whole time about voice and choice, and just giving students as many options as are relevant to demonstrating mastery. And then mastery-based learning. So this is, of course, a buzzword right now, and something that often can be in conflict with time-based learning, because mastery-based learning means a student's not going to move on from that point until they've really got it. So oftentimes, we're thinking through a traditional school, and so this kid's got a 90, a 60, 70. The kid with the 60, we might send them out for tutoring a little bit. Hopefully we get them up to 70, but we've got time. We've got to move on, and, there's just not time. But what mastery-based learning does, and what an LMS or online learning can do, again, is building playlists of types of learning experiences for students that will let them delve deeper or get that extra help that they need and spend more time. So one student may progress to a different point than another student over the course of the year, but we know that what they've progressed is something that they truly understand and that they can truly put into practice. So I think where people right now are really having conversations is, how does that fit into traditional school, or what can we do to make traditional school more of a mastery-based learning environment? So if you think about how kids and even adults learn things these days, if I want to figure out something and I don't know how to do it, what's one of my first tools that I'm going to use to figure out how to do something? You just type it in the chat box. The internet. I'm going to Google it, I'm going to YouTube it, and I'm going to figure it out. Okay, again, we've talked about, how we have to think through what is a good source, but once we figure that out, I don't have to go, if I'm going to figure out how to properly paint my piece of furniture and I don't know what paint to use and I don't know the techniques, I'm going to go to YouTube. I'm going to go buy the supplies. I'm going to get a piece of furniture. I'm going to practice it. It might turn out well the first time. It might be a disaster. Then I'm going to go get another piece of furniture and I'm going to try it again. So I'm going to do the skill until I've figured it out and I've got it right. I'm not going to go, well, 40% of this dresser looks fine, so I'm just going to move on and, start the new thing. I really, if it's something I want to show out in my house, I'm going to make sure that I do it well. Yeah, so Pinterest. There's a ton of different places that we can go, but mastery-based learning means we're going to find the resources we need in the moment. We're going to learn it until we can do it well, and we're not going to move on until then. And someone commented in the chat box, it ties in well with individualized learning. Absolutely, because we're meeting the needs of each student where they're at. And honestly, on the front end or the back end, it takes a lot more time to set that up. But once you do have it set up, it creates a much more meaningful user experience for students. And we know that they're moving out into the next stage of their life with skills that are going to make sense for what they need. Yes, Wikipedia. So, there's a number of things that we don't think of as traditional learning that help. We've got these YouTube channels, and they're people who consider themselves experts at what they do. And so they put those videos out there for us, and then we as a user can decide, yeah, we think, they know what they're talking about. We're going to follow this idea, or we're going to move on to the next video. I do want to, before we close, I want to make a comment about those of you that are using this for professional development for adult learners. And especially, this can apply a lot to high school. The older your student gets, or the more adult, you value autonomy. So adult learners, they want to be given the tools to do something, but they also kind of want to be left alone to figure out how to do it. Or they want the choice to ask you if they need some help. So you might think about flexible course sequencing, where in a professional development course, and even in a student course, you don't have to go from 1 to 10 in that order. You might have 10 modules, but an adult learner or an older learner may go to module 1. They may figure, they may already have that knowledge, so they move to module 3. and they may move back to module 2 because there's a skill they forgot about and then jump to 10. So think about flexible course sequencing and allowing learners to move in the sequence that makes sense for them. As we've talked about, building connections to real world or practical experience makes sense for all learners, no matter how young or old, but especially for adults. If I don't need this in the moment, my schedule is so full, I'm not going to take the time to learn it. I took German in high school because I just knew I was going to go to Europe at some point in my life, and that was going to be practical to me. And as life turns out, I actually wound up spending 6 years in Mexico. And so at that moment, when it was time to move to this country, then suddenly I was really interested in learning Spanish and going to language school and studying it, whereas in high school, that was the thing everyone was doing. And it just wasn't interesting to me. But now I'm a fluent, near native speaker because I was put in a situation where I needed that skill. So as teachers need the skill, whether it's how to do something technology-wise, whether it's something they need to teach as the subject matter expert, then they're going to be a lot more likely to learn it. And then also shows, where's the goal? What are they working toward? What is the end game? Oftentimes we throw new technology at teachers, and I'm guilty of this because I love and I think this tool is so cool, but if I can't show why is it practical and how is this going to help me do something, then it doesn't make sense for my teachers to learn it. Let's close with this question. What might be the benefits? I'll add the benefits and the challenges of implementing mastery-based learning.
I'll give everybody a few seconds to answer that in the chat. I see them coming in now.
Thanks. Yeah, absolutely. A paradigm shift, changing how we think about things. How do you deal with students that get stuck, that can't seem to master or move on? What tools do we have to deal with that challenge? Flexibility. There was one question here, the best introductory course to learning an authoring tool. I would say research those 3 design models that I gave you at the beginning, because really the tool that you're going to author in probably depends on your school district. Also, Understanding by Design is a great book and resource that's been around for quite a long time. So those are the 4 things that I would research for building courses. Yeah. Another challenge is providing different levels of learning to teach something that's a more difficult concept. And then, of course, how do we align to a state assessment? And buy-in. Buy-in is absolutely vital. I think we're out of time, so I'm going to pause that conversation there. But I thank everyone for their great comments. And this, I will tweet this presentation out so you have those tools. And then I know there's a recording available later as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Summer. That was a fabulous presentation. And thank all of you for attending this session. If you entered the conference within the first 20 minutes of the session, you're going to earn CPE credits for this session. Your certificate will appear on the My Agenda Join Session page, and you can go there and save it digitally or print it. To access the recording of this session, as Summer mentioned, please visit the conference tab on the conference homepage and click on View Recorded Sessions. Additionally, there'll be transcripts of each session posted there as well. The next session today and the last session today will be at 3 o'clock, and it's entitled Texting, Calling, Messaging, Successful Communication in the Virtual World. And our presenter was in this class today, so I actually saw her name pop up a few times. Very excited to see y'all in that. And thank you again, Summer, for a fabulous presentation. It was awesome. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great afternoon.
You too.